Hi, everyone. Today we are going to take a look at how we can analyze a text to find important details to support our answers to text-dependent questions that we create. On Friday, we took a look at all about wolves. We broke it into subheadings, and you zeroed in on the communication of how wolves communicate and what their daily life looks like. You wrote main ideas, and then you jotted all the details to support those main ideas to take notes to track information that you found that was important in the passage. It's important that you know how to do that because this week when we start book clubs, you are going to Google some information and read some articles about the time period in which your book took place. And you are going to need to take some notes on that. And then you'll use the information that you find to discuss the time period of your book. And when you start reading your book with your group, it's all going to make more sense to you as to what's taking place in the book because of what you know about the time period your book's taking place. So in order to be able to do that, we want to get really good at note taking and really good at developing questions. So when you start to meet with your book clubs, you guys are going to come up with one of those questions that could be asked with any passage. And that's going to set your purpose for reading. As you go off to read, your goal will be to answer that question because when you meet back together, you'll discuss it. The second goal for you is to create a text-dependent question. You won't be able to do that until you get into the text. But we went over your check-in data and we've identified some standards that maybe you hadn't mastered. And we've taken a look at the Common Core standards and the stems, the question stems that are used to test the standards. So the standards that you may not have mastered, you're familiar with what those question stems look like, and now you're going to practice writing your own questions using those stems as you read through this new historical fiction book for your book club. You'll create those questions and you will jot the answers. Then when you meet back with your book club, you will hold like a mini Paideia seminar. And instead of me asking questions or your teacher asking questions, you will ask the text-dependent questions that you came up with. And that is how you'll hold your book club. That will be your discussion for your book club. So you'll all go around the table and ask your text-dependent questions and everybody will give input. So in order to do that, we are going to practice getting ourselves ready for that. So far, we've used this guided questioning for close reading tool. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about a brief history of wolves today, just to use as an example for this. And then you're going to do this work on your own with a passage about Malala, which you'll learn all about her in just a little bit. So when we approach a brief history of wolves, we approached it to analyze details that would help us understand wolves. We jotted the title. The author was Cornelia Hutt. It was an informational passage. It was published by Kids Planet, and we weren't real sure when the publication date was. What we already understood about the text was that just from the title, it was going to give us some information about wolves in the United States. So we came up last week when we were doing this activity. I gave you the question, what was the author's stance or attitude about the topic, and how does her language show her perspective? So you answered those two questions in one of your notebook entries. Today we're going to move on to analyzing text-dependent or text-specific questions. So here, using the question stems that go with our Common Core standards, I created what quote in the selection is an example of the author's point of view. So what you would need to do is, and we did this, we talked about this in class, you would need to look through the passage and you would need to pull out textual evidence that demonstrated how the author felt about the brief history of wolves. Another question that I made up was in paragraph 5, what's the author's attitude toward the Europeans? Okay, that's the one we're going to focus on today. Now, we're going to take that text-dependent question in paragraph 5, what's the author's attitude toward the Europeans? And what I did was I just went back to paragraph 5 and I pulled out some details that would support what the author's attitude was. So one thing in line 25 and 26 in this passage, and you're welcome to open up the passage if you want to look back, she brings out that they brought with them a legacy of persecution. The Europeans brought with them a legacy of persecution toward the wolves. Now, what do I think about this detail? The author notes that the Europeans had knowledge of causing trouble for someone who was weaker for a long time. Okay? Another thing she said in line 27 and 28, the killing of wolves came to symbolize the triumph of civilization. What do I think about this detail? The author helps me understand that Europeans did not care about wildlife and they felt superior to the wolves. And as they killed the wolves, they considered it their triumph over a wasteland. Then in lines 33 and 34, she says, when the deer population dropped as a result of overhunting, which was done by the Europeans, wolves became a scapegoat. So here she says, okay, so the Europeans are deer hunting, they're killing these deer, and now they want to blame it on the poor wolves. So what do I think about this detail? The author wants me to understand that the Europeans hunted the deer and depleted the population, but instead of taking responsibility for that, the Europeans blamed it on the wolf. Now, how can I connect all these details? This is the evidences in the passage that demonstrate her attitude toward the Europeans. So now that I've read back over these, I can connect these details by saying the author realized that the Europeans had knowledge of preying on the weak. The Europeans blamed hardships on the wolves to justify killing them so that they could establish themselves as superior beings. They were afraid of the wolves, so they just wanted to get rid of them. The author uses several words and phrases like wolves flourished, however, persecution, intensified, triumph in killing. These words, this language, helps me to understand that she does not approve of the Europeans at all. So, what you're going to do, let's take a look at your notebook entry. You're going to do this same work today with a passage that we've given you. The passage that you're going to read is called Malala Yousafzai's, and I'm probably not saying her name right at all, A Normal Yet Powerful Girl. All right, so Malala was born in 1997. She's a Pakistani activist for female education, and she's the youngest ever winner of a Nobel Peace Prize. Malala is from the Swat Valley in northwest Pakistan, where the local Taliban has banned girls from attending school. Malala, whose family ran a chain of local schools, publicly stood against the Taliban's actions and launched an international movement. Now, I'm going to stop right there because this story gets intense and I want you to read more about it. But Malala is a teen activist for girls' education because in Pakistan, they did not allow girls to go to school, and she felt like that was wrong. So she was an advocate for education so that girls could get an education just like boys. So what you're going to do is you are going to, first of all, approach the text, and you're going to put the title, the author, the publisher, what you already know just from what I told you. The type of genre would be informational text and when it was published. Now, this information, when you approach the text, can come from here. Here's your title. It's by NPR staff, and it was written in 2013. So then if there's more information to approaching it that maybe isn't shown, then you can leave that blank. All right, now, once you approach the text, you're going to fill all that in. Now, questioning the text, these are the questions that we choose from before we read the passage. So I want you to just look at these and choose 2 of them. And type the question straight from here, like what words or phrases stand out to me as I read. and maybe who's the intended audience of the text. Okay, so you're going to put, or what information or ideas are presented at the beginning of the text, or what do I learn about this topic? So you're pulling information from here. You're going to type a question here and the second question here, and as you read, you're going to answer the questions that you wrote down in these two spots. All right, so you're setting yourself up for reading. That's your purpose, and you've approached your text. This is your text. You're going to read it, and then when you finish, or as you read, think on those standards that you may not have mastered and what stems go with those standards. And then try to create a text-dependent question using one of those stems. For example, it could be, what's the impact of paragraph 5 on the overall passage? Or what was the purpose of paragraph 3? So you'll type your question here, and then just like I just showed you in this video, you're going to write down evidences, right? One detail here that answers your question, one detail here that answers your question, and one detail here that answers your question. And then you're going to tell what you think about those details, and then you are going to answer your question. So these details are evidences that support the answer to your question. Here you put the answer to your question. So all of these little spots below and above the text, and these questions here should be answered, and everything should be filled in for you to get full credit today for your notebook entry.